Hi, friends. Are you ready to jump down a hobbit hole? We're continuing on our series From Cozy to the Cross, a Lenten adventure. And we're journeying with Bilbo, who's reached the end of his adventure. This book's almost over, but don't worry. We have another one lined up for you. We are in chapter 12, Blessed are the poor in spirit. And you're like, wait a second. Yes, that's a beatitude. And we're taught, though, here after Thorn is laid to rest. And the dwarves were on the mountain, right? And they've come down. After Thorn is laid to rest, Dane becomes king under the mountain. Under the mountain, not on the mountain. Isn't that interesting? And he divides the treasure equitably. He desires Bilbo to reward Bilbo most richly of all, but the hobbit declines. He says a simple hobbit wouldn't know what to do with such a huge amount, and he takes only the gold and silver that a strong pony could carry, quite as much as he could manage. And honestly, it's quite a lot, right? And now Bilbo is journeying home with Gandalf by his side. And as we think of his journey, sometimes Gandalf was by his side and sometimes he was not. But we hear possibility, was Gandalf like a guardian angel that would have always been with Bilbo even when he wasn't seen or felt? Kind of reminded here of that footsteps in the sand. The little poem was where someone looks back. They're walking with Jesus and they look back and they say, well, sometimes there's two sets of footprints and sometimes there's only one. Where did you go, God? And God, sometimes I carried you. And it does feel like that sometimes here with Bilbo as well. And as they're going, they're greeted not with hymns exactly, but with elven song. And this time the elves are singing about mutability. That not just mutability, degradation. Things that we thought were wonderful and worthy, but aren't. Things that we rely on that are worldly, that we should not be relying on. Like swords that rust, thrones and crowns that perish, passing of the strength that we all trust in our youth, right? And the passing of wealth. They contrast that with the enduring things of nature, singing like the stars are far brighter than gems without measure. The moon is far whiter than silver and treasure. The fire more shining on hearth in the glowing than gold won by mining. So why go a roaming? And it's interesting because it does say roaming, not journeying, right? Roaming, wandering off the path. And we all need to be wary of that. We know what happens when they journeyed off the dedicated path that Gandalf had told them to stay on. They got captured. There were temptations. All kinds of craziness happened because they wandered off the path. Did God make good of it in the end? Yes. But that doesn't mean it's then greater than the good that he intended for. So friends, stay on the path. And we're here in Lent. We're a few weeks in. And it can be on your penances. Maybe you're not seeing the growth that you wanted and you're saying, why is it worth it? Here we're reminded on page 112 that we should be open and alive to the gifts of creation that God has given us, and that being blind to such gifts leaves us susceptible to dragon sickness, to greed and pride. When we're not happy with the humble things, the moon and the stars are available to everyone, friends. And when we forget that, when we go after the greatest things that only a few select can have, we want that secret knowledge, that secret power, the secret everything for the select, because we're amazing. When we get that, yes, it says, if you're blinded by the darkness of pride, you'll be cursed with material wealth with which you will purchase their ticket to hell. Not everyone with pride ends up with material wealth, though, but they do purchase their ticket to hell. It says, if you're open and alive, which is a little dangerous in this day and age, it sounds like being woke. That's not what they mean. When you're open to the goodness of God and seeing him, you are guided by the light of humility. You'll be blessed with spiritual poverty with which you will inherit the kingdom of heaven. And it tells us here that the Franciscans of Assisi had that. If you are a Franciscan, you know why I'm saying being a Franciscan is not a guarantee of that. Franciscans have been led astray just as much as anyone else, but in many varied ways. Poverty is a great concept. It is very difficult to live. And in fact, the three main orders of Franciscans, the Friars Minor, Capuchin, and Friars Minor Conventional, all live poverty in a slightly different way. Same as the different orders of the third order. There's many orders in the third order. I'm talking here of the secular ones. The main one being the secular Franciscan order under the rule of 1978. But there are smaller orders that have gone back to previous rules that had a stronger tie to poverty. We're always searching for that perfect balance, and it's difficult. And sometimes it's too hard, right? And then we have a new rule as a rejuvenation, and it takes time to see how that rule is going to work, if it's tweaked even better, because there's not just a rule either, there's constitutions. So those who have gone back to the original rules certainly have modified constitutions. They can't go by the old rules, which listed things like in medieval Italian monetary forms. You can't do that. So there are constitutions as well. And so you may be working on a rule of life. We talked about that with Stanislaw Popinski and his rule of life. What is your rule of life? And Bilbo's going to have to keep this up when he goes home if he wants to keep the spiritual gains that he has made. Is he going to make a rule of life? And we may find out more about that in the next book. It does tell us here the purpose of his journey, which was unknown to the reluctant hobbit on his departure, was no doubt part of Gandalf's purpose in inviting him to join the dwarves, was not material wealth, but spiritual health. The journey was a pilgrimage. And many of us go on spiritual pilgrimages in Lent with our prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, and then also doing the Stations of the Cross. And that's one of the reasons we should be up and moving on the Stations of the Cross. Yes, it can be difficult. It's difficult for a reason. It is actually a substitute. It's a poor substitute, but it's a substitute for going to the Holy Land, which many of us will never be able to do. And so we go and we walk the Stations of the Cross in our humility. And you can have those set up in your backyard. They can be set up in a church, wherever they need to be. And you can actually review the Stations of the Cross every single night before you go to bed. I have great difficulty with this. I usually fall asleep doing it. But what I end up doing is meditating very deeply on one station each night. And I fall asleep, yes, in that meditation. But that is how I fall asleep. I hope it helps me wake up. I wake up and then I pray the rosary, among other things, as I get up. So it's kind of interesting because I think Stations of the Cross, in a way, is a much deeper reflection on the sorrowful mysteries. So when you're in the sorrowful mysteries and then praying Stations of the Cross, I think it's an incredibly powerful time. As well as if you are a Franciscan, or anyone really, you can be praying the Franciscan Crown Rosary, the sorrowful mysteries. There is a sorrowful set as well. We have them on this channel in the playlist marked prayer. So here we have Bilbo. He gets home. And as he gets home, it's been more than a year since he's been gone, and he comes home and they're auctioning off all his belongings because they believe he is dead. And we can have that as well. You go on a spiritual journey and you grow, and you're not the same to your friends and relatives. Some of them just never really accept you back. They haven't been on the same journey you have. So as well as making your own rule of life to keep up the changes you have made, does that include drawing the others on a spiritual journey as well? Because you don't necessarily, you want to leave those behind who are a bad influence, but if they are your friends and loved ones, perhaps there is some spiritual growth that will happen for them as well. It says here that his relatives, they were not on friendly terms with him ever after. Having coveted his home, they never forgave him for having returned to it. And I don't know, it's just about coveting his home. Again, he returned different. That was difficult for them. And we have to know that can happen on our journey. That is one of the attacks of the devil, to get you to abandon things like your Lenten practices. And it talks and reminds us here on page 115 that we're reminded, even though we're trying to return to this wonderful thing that we thought we had in the past, we can never quite return to that beauty. Why? Because of the fall of man. We are still sinful. Yes, baptism restored our great friendship with God, but it didn't fully restore us to where we were before the fall. We lost the preternatural gifts. And so we're going to do the best we can, But just like everything around us decays, they give some examples of like things around your house decaying. You have to keep up the constant maintenance. It's the same thing in the spiritual journey. So we're going to return to this. We're going to look at the next book, which is based off the Lord of the Rings series, as a way to go more deeply into this, as setting up some good habits. And so we won't return to be the selfish little hobbits that we were, but a little bit taller, a little bit poorer in spirit, a little bit more humble. And so that when we come out of Lent into the Easter season, it is going to be easy. We are going to be celebrating our new life with Christ as well as his resurrection. As St. Francis says, friends, we must begin again, for up till now we have done nothing. So we'll see you very soon in our book about the Lord of the Rings. That'll be just on Tuesday. I'm excited to begin our next journey, again, going more deeply into our spiritual journey this Lent. God bless you, friends.